On a seemingly normal summer morning in June 2022, two experienced divers arrived at Buford Springs for what should have been a routine dive. Within hours, both would lose their lives in the dark depths of this underwater cave system. But what turned this ordinary dive into a deadly tragedy? How did two skilled divers end up trapped in one of Florida's most challenging cave systems? And what crucial lessons can we learn from this devastating incident? A hidden gem with a dark history. Buford Springs, nestled in Florida's Chassahowitzka Wildlife Management Area, is a diver's paradise and a diver's nightmare. Discovered in 1973 by William Walters, this underwater cave system features a maze-like network of passages descending to depths of 167 feet. While its crystal-clear waters and stunning underwater landscapes attract divers from around the world, it holds a deadly secret. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission has long warned that this site ranks among the world's most dangerous diving locations. Think of it as nature's deadly invitation, a beautiful but treacherous underwater labyrinth where even the smallest mistake can prove fatal. Just 6 miles away lies the infamous Eagle's Nest sinkhole, known as the Mount Everest of cave diving, where at least 12 divers have lost their lives over 4 decades. But on this particular June morning, Buford Springs was about to add 2 more names to its own tragic history. The fatal dive begins. It started as an ordinary Wednesday morning. 3 teenagers, 2 15-year-olds and a 17-year-old, had arrived early at the springs to swim and enjoy the summer day. Around 11 a.m., they noticed 2 men arriving at the site. 52-year-old Todd Richard McKenna, an ex-United States Coast Guard chief, and his 63-year-old neighbor, Stephen Roderick Gambrell. Both were experienced cave divers who had explored such waters many times before. As the men prepared their gear, they chatted casually with the teenagers. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary as they began their first dive. The teens watched the divers' air bubbles rising to the surface, a normal sight they'd seen many times before. After a short exploration, both men surfaced, and this is where things started to take a concerning turn. The teenagers overheard a crucial conversation between the 2 divers. McKenna and Gambrell were discussing whether they had enough air in their tanks for a second dive into the cave system. Even more worrying, one of them mentioned a possible leak in his tank. Despite these red flags, the pair decided to attempt another dive. What the divers didn't realize was their equipment choice would play a critical role in what was about to unfold. They were using smaller tanks than standard, 53 and 72 cubic foot aluminum cylinders instead of the typical 80 cubic foot tanks. This meant they had significantly less air available than they might have thought, as their air pressure gauges only showed pressure, not actual air volume. The descent into disaster. Between 11:45 a.m. and noon, McKenna and Gambrell disappeared beneath the surface for their second dive. The teenagers continued their swimming, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Shortly after the divers submerged, one of them, Stephen Gambrell, suddenly appeared at the surface, floating face down in the water. At first, the teens thought nothing was wrong. They assumed Gambrell was simply looking down through the water, searching for his diving partner. But then they noticed something alarming. There were no bubbles coming to the surface, no signs of breathing, no movement. The young swimmers quickly realized something was terribly wrong. They swam over to check on Gambrell, but received no response. Despite their best efforts, the teenagers could only manage to drag his motionless body to the nearby dock. Unable to lift him out of the water, one of them made the emergency call to 911 at approximately 12:20 p.m. The desperate search. When deputies arrived at the scene, they immediately jumped into the water and lifted Gambrell's body onto the dock. It was immediately clear that he was deceased, but there was still another diver somewhere in the depths below. The deputies knew that given the earlier conversation about air supply, Todd McKenna should be surfacing any minute. His tank would be running out of air. But as minutes turned into hours, McKenna didn't surface. The situation had gone from bad to worse. The International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery Team, IUCRR, was called to the scene, arriving at approximately 2:15 p.m. These specialized cave divers had the grim task of locating McKenna's body. What they found painted a tragic picture of the disaster's final moments. McKenna's body was discovered at a depth of 137 feet near the permanent cave line. Both divers' tanks were empty. They had literally run out of air in the depths of the cave system. While their equipment showed no obvious signs of malfunction, the decision to dive with smaller tanks may have proved fatal. Understanding the tragedy. When investigators examined the equipment afterward, they found everything was functioning properly. Even the reported tank leak turned out to be minor, a slight issue where the regulator met the tank valve, which could be fixed by simply readjusting the O-ring. This leaves us with a haunting question. What really happened in those final moments? Experts believe the most likely scenario is that McKenna encountered trouble deep in the cave system. Gambrell, seeing his friend in distress, may have attempted a rescue. But with their limited air supply already running low, this rescue attempt proved fatal for both men. Gambrell might have made a desperate sprint for the surface when he realized the situation was hopeless, explaining why his body was found floating while McKenna's remained in the depths. The tragedy highlights several crucial factors that contributed to the disaster. The divers were exploring beyond the recreational diving limit of 130 feet. Their smaller tanks provided less air than standard equipment, and most critically, they may have underestimated the risks of a second deep dive with questionable air supplies. Lessons learned and lives remembered. Todd McKenna and Stephen Gambrell weren't inexperienced novices. They were neighbors who had dived together countless times. McKenna was a former Coast Guard chief with extensive water experience. Gambrell had been diving these caves for decades. Yet, even their considerable experience couldn't save them from the unforgiving nature of cave diving. This incident serves as a reminder of cave diving's inherent dangers. As the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission warns, even experienced cave divers have perished in these underwater mazes. The sport requires extensive training, proper equipment, and strict adherence to safety protocols. Most importantly, it demands respect for the limitations of both equipment and human capability. Today, Buford Springs continues to attract divers from around the world. But the deaths of McKenna and Gambrell stand as a stark reminder that in the underwater world, there's no room for compromise when it comes to safety. Every decision, every piece of equipment, and every breath of air can mean the difference between life and death. Remember to like and subscribe for more fascinating yet tragic diving stories. Until next time, stay safe and respect the depths.